They say a mother's love is unconditional. But what happens when that love is not returned? What happens when the children you raised, the ones you gave your life for, turn their backs on you when you need them the most? This is not just a story of sickness or old age. It is a story of family betrayal so cold it could freeze even the warmest heart. It is the story of an abandoned mother, left alone in the middle of winter, shivering in the dark, wondering how her own children could treat her like a burden. But what my children didn't know is that behind the frail body they rejected, behind the tired hands and fading eyes, I carried a secret, a hidden fortune worth 87 million. They thought they were leaving behind a weak, useless old woman. What they really abandoned was the key to everything they ever wanted. And this is my story. A story of pain, resilience, and the shocking twist that would change everything. When I look back over the long years of my life, I can still see the woman I once was. Young, determined, and holding 3 small hands that clung to me like I was their whole world. I was never rich, never glamorous. I didn't wear fancy clothes or live in a house that shined in magazines. But I had something better. I had love. And I believed, with every ounce of my being, that love was enough. I grew up in a small town where people measured wealth not by money, but by the warmth in their homes. I married my late husband, Daniel, when I was just 20. He was a quiet man, hardworking, gentle, and steady as the sunrise. We dreamed of a simple life, raising children, planting roots, and finding joy in the everyday. Our first child, Emily, came a year later. I still remember the day I brought her home from the hospital. Her eyes were wide and curious, as if she was already trying to take in the whole world. She was my sunshine baby, the one who taught me what it meant to live for someone else. Michael followed 3 years after Emily. He was strong, even as a boy, with a stubborn streak that made me laugh and sigh in equal measure. He wanted to climb every tree, test every boundary, and prove he was capable of more than his years allowed. And then, sweet Sarah, my youngest. She arrived as a surprise, a blessing we didn't expect but instantly cherished. With her soft curls and easy smile, she became the laughter in our home, the song that carried us through the hardest days. Those children were my world. I cooked their meals, sewed their clothes, read them bedtime stories until I fell asleep mid-sentence. I worked night shifts at a diner when Daniel's health began to fail, slipping out quietly so the kids wouldn't see how tired I was. I carried bags of groceries on foot when the car broke down, stretching every dollar until it cried. But none of it mattered, because when I looked into their little faces, I knew I was building something beautiful. 3 lives that would grow strong and carry my love with them long after I was gone. People used to tell me, children don't remember the money you spent. They remember the sacrifices you made. I believed that. I trusted that every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every silent tear I shed in the bathroom so they wouldn't hear, it would one day come back to me in the form of love, respect, and care. As the years passed, my children grew. Emily became ambitious, always with her nose in books, dreaming of a future in law. Michael, athletic and bold, wanted to conquer the world, talking about business ventures even before he finished high school. And Sarah, my gentle soul, dreamed of art, of colors and canvases and a life filled with creativity. I was so proud of them. I bragged about them to anyone who would listen. The grocer, the mailman, the lady next to me in church. They were my badge of honor, proof that my sacrifices had not been in vain. But there were cracks, even then. Little moments I ignored because my heart refused to see them clearly. Emily, once affectionate, began to roll her eyes at my old-fashioned ways. Michael, always restless, sometimes treated me more like a housekeeper than a mother, demanding things with a tone that cut deeper than he realized. Sarah, though kinder, was often swayed by her older siblings, her loyalty torn between love for me and fear of losing their approval. Still, I brushed it aside. They were children, after all. Children grow, change, rebel. I told myself it was just a phase, that when they became adults, they would remember who had held them through fevers, who had stitched their torn clothes, who had sat up waiting when they came home late. Life, however, has a way of testing even the strongest beliefs. When Daniel passed away, the house felt emptier than I could bear. He had been my partner in everything, the anchor in our little storm-tossed boat. His absence left me with a silence so loud it nearly crushed me. But I told myself I wasn't alone. I still had my children. I still had Emily, Michael, and Sarah. They promised me, at his funeral, that they would take care of me. I remember Emily holding my hand, saying, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll always be here." Michael added, "You raised us. Now it's our turn to be there for you." And Sarah simply wept against my shoulder, whispering, "I love you." Those words were my lifeline. I clung to them when nights were cold and mornings felt impossible. And yet, as I would come to learn, words are easy to speak in moments of grief. It is the years afterward, the daily acts of love and care, that show whether those words were truth or simply comfort offered in passing. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, I see how fragile my trust was. I see how I mistook polite promises for unshakable loyalty. I see how I believed in a bond that for me was unbreakable, but for them could be fractured by inconvenience. At the time, though, I still believed. I still placed my entire heart, my entire future in their hands. Because what else could a mother do? I had built my life on the foundation of family. I had given everything, every ounce of energy, every dollar earned, every dream deferred. To these three souls I loved more than my own breath. And so I never saw the storm coming. I never imagined that the very hands I had held so tenderly as children would one day release me into the cold. But that is the cruel truth of my story. And it is where everything begins. It happened so suddenly, like a candle snuffed out by an unexpected draft. One winter morning, as I was making tea, my legs gave way beneath me. The teapot shattered across the floor, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly fragile. A neighbor found me hours later, pale and shaking, and rushed me to the hospital. The diagnosis was not catastrophic, but it was sobering. My body was wearing down. Years of overwork and hidden ailments had caught up with me. The doctors spoke of arthritis, weak circulation, and the need for long-term rest. They didn't say it directly, but their eyes carried the truth. I was no longer the strong, capable woman who had raised 3 children alone. I was an old woman now, dependent, vulnerable, and in need of help. At first, my children came rushing in. Emily, polished in her suit, swept into the hospital room with flowers, her voice bright but hurried. She kissed my cheek and said, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of everything." Michael followed, loud and confident, slapping me gently on the shoulder as if I had just tripped, not collapsed. "You'll bounce back," he assured me. "You're tougher than anyone I know." And sweet Sarah, tears spilling down her cheeks, clutched my hand as if letting go would mean losing me forever. For a moment, I believed I was safe. I believed the promise they had made at their father's funeral still held true, that together they would carry me as I had carried them. But weeks turned into months, and the shine of their concern began to fade. Emily's visits grew shorter. She always had a meeting, a case, a deadline. She answered phone calls in my hospital room, pacing back and forth, sighing at every interruption. "I'll come back when things calm down," she said one evening, her eyes already on her phone as she walked out the door. Michael came less and less. He complained about traffic, about how far the hospital was from his office. When he did come, he spoke not of me, but of his business deals, his new car, his frustrations with the stock market. I would sit there, nodding, grateful simply for his presence, even though he never asked how I truly felt. Only Sarah remained somewhat constant. She brought soup, read to me, sat quietly by my bed when I couldn't sleep. But even she began to show the strain. Her voice grew tired, her eyes downcast when Emily or Michael criticized her for doing too much. "You can't carry all of this, Sarah," they told her. "It's not your job alone." The night of the betrayal still lives in me like a scar that never heals. It was late January, the kind of winter that gnaws at the bones. Snow had been falling all day, heavy and relentless, piling on rooftops, swallowing the streets, silencing the world in a blanket of white. The news warned of a blizzard. Winds strong enough to bend trees, temperatures cold enough to freeze skin within minutes. That evening, my children arrived together, something they rarely did anymore. Emily wore her usual polished look, though her coat was dusted with snowflakes. Michael was impatient, pacing as though every second in my presence cost him dearly. Sarah looked nervous, her eyes darting between her siblings and me. "Mom," Emily began, her voice firm but not unkind. "We've been talking, and we think it's best if you don't stay here alone anymore." I frowned, clutching the blanket around my shoulders. "What do you mean?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We found a place, somewhere you'll be taken care of." My heart skipped. A nursing home? Had it come to that already? "I don't want to leave my home," I whispered. "This house, it's all I have left of your father, of you as children." "Mom, please," Emily pressed, her voice tinged with impatience. "It's for your safety. You can't keep living like this. Tonight, we'll take you there. You'll be more comfortable." Her words carried a finality that left no room for argument. And though fear twisted in my chest, I agreed. Because what choice did I have? I was too weak to fight, too dependent on them to resist. They wrapped me in my heaviest coat and guided me outside. The wind struck my face like needles, sharp and merciless. Snow crunched under our boots as they led me to the car. Inside, the heater hummed, but the silence between us was colder than the air outside. I tried to speak, to ask where we were going, but every time, my words were swallowed by their vague reassurances. "Don't worry, Mom. It won't be long. You'll be fine." We drove for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the countryside. The city lights vanished behind us, replaced by endless fields buried under snow. The road narrowed, flanked by dark trees heavy with ice. My unease grew with every mile. Finally, the car stopped in front of a small, weather-beaten cabin. Its windows were dark, the roof sagging under the weight of snow. No lights, no smoke from the chimney, no sign of life. I looked at them in confusion. This is it?" Michael avoided my gaze. Emily's lips were pressed into a thin line. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. They helped me out of the car, their hands firm but cold. The snow bit into my legs, the wind howled around us. My heart pounded as they opened the creaking door of the cabin. Inside was nothing but dust, broken furniture, and the stench of abandonment. "Why are we here?" My voice trembled. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Just stay here for now. We'll come back." "Come back?" My voice rose, cracking with fear. "This place has no heat, no food, nothing. Please, don't leave me here." Michael's jaw tightened. "We can't do this anymore, Mom. We can't keep carrying the weight. You don't understand how much strain this puts on us. You'll be safe here. Someone will find you." Safe. The word was a cruel joke. "Please," I begged, reaching for Sarah. "Sweetheart, don't let them do this." For a moment, I saw the battle in her eyes. Her lips trembled, her hands shook. But then Emily called her name sharply, and like a frightened child, Sarah pulled away. And just like that, the door closed. I stumbled toward it, pounding weakly with my fists. "Don't leave me! Please, I'm your mother. I carried you. I loved you. I gave you everything." But my cries were swallowed by the storm. The car engine roared to life, the headlights swept across the walls, and then darkness. They were gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow outside. I sank to the floor, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my chest aching with a pain deeper than any illness. The cold seeped into my bones, but colder still was the realization. My children had abandoned me. I tried to stay strong, to gather scraps of strength, but the cabin was merciless. Wind screamed through the broken windows. Snowflakes drifted in, settling on my skin like tiny shards of ice. My body shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. I wrapped myself in my coat, whispering into the darkness. So this is what motherhood comes to. This is how my story ends. Memories flooded my mind. Emily's first steps, Michael's mischievous grin, Sarah's lullabies sung in her soft little voice. I remembered nights when I went hungry so they could eat, mornings when I worked 2 jobs so they could go to school. I had given everything, and in return, they had given me this. Tears froze on my cheeks as I curled into myself, waiting for either sleep or death to claim me. But as the storm raged on, a strange calm settled over me. I realized that while they had stripped me of warmth, of safety, of dignity, they had not stripped me of truth. I knew who I was, I knew what I had given, and I knew something they did not. Because beneath my frail body and failing health, I carried a secret that would one day turn this betrayal into justice. They thought they were leaving behind a weak old woman. What they really abandoned was the keeper of an $87 million fortune. The night in the cabin should have been my last. The blizzard howled outside, each gust of wind like a hand pressing me closer to death. My body trembled violently, my breath shallow and ragged. And yet, somewhere in the hollow silence of that place, a thought flickered, like a candle refusing to die. They don't know. My children thought they had left behind a frail, penniless woman, a burden, an old life they no longer wished to carry. But the truth, hidden deep within me, was a secret I had guarded for decades. I was not poor. I was not helpless. I was, in fact, the owner of a fortune so vast that it could have changed all their lives, if only they had shown me the love I had once given them. $87 million. Yes, that was the figure. Not an exaggeration, not a dream, but the real sum I had built quietly, piece by piece, while the world, and even my children, believed I was simply scraping by. It began with Daniel, my late husband. He was a carpenter, steady and humble, but he had an eye for land. Long before anyone thought our small town would grow, Daniel bought tiny parcels of property, empty lots, old barns, forgotten stretches of soil. Back then, they were worth little. But he believed land was like gold, waiting patiently beneath the dust. After he passed, I could have sold everything just to survive. Instead, I held on. I worked nights, saved every penny, and learned. I read books on investing, attended community classes on finance, even asked questions of bankers who looked down their noses at me. Slowly, carefully, I began to build. A rental home here, a small business investment there. Years later, shares in a company that no one believed in, until it became one of the largest in the country. I never flaunted it. I still cooked in the same worn pots, still mended my clothes, still clipped coupons at the grocery store. People thought I was frugal, maybe even poor. But I liked it that way. I wanted to know who cared for me, not for my money. And most of all, I wanted to see who my children would become without the lure of wealth shaping their choices. I told myself that when the time was right, when they showed they were kind and trustworthy, I would reveal the truth. That fortune was meant to be theirs, not as a reward, but as a legacy, something to carry them forward, to give them security I never had. But as I sat shivering in that abandoned cabin, I realized the bitter truth. They had already shown me who they were. Emily, with her cold pragmatism, who measured love in hours spent and dollars lost. Michael, with his restless greed, who saw responsibility as a chain dragging him down. And Sarah, my sweet girl, too easily swayed, too fearful to stand against her siblings when I needed her most. They had all failed, not because they left me in the cold, but because they had allowed their hearts to freeze long before that night. The money was never the point. I would have given it all away for a single act of kindness, for a single moment of genuine love. But lying there, with frost gathering on my skin, I understood. No amount of wealth could buy what I had yearned for all along: my children's care, their respect, their loyalty. Instead, that fortune would serve a different purpose. It would not be a gift to the ungrateful. It would be my weapon, my justice, my final act of truth. Because one day, when the will was read, when the lawyers spoke, and the numbers were laid bare, my children would finally see what they had thrown away that night in the snow. They would realize they hadn't just abandoned their mother. They had abandoned a legacy worth $87 million, and they would live with that knowledge forever. The storm raged on outside, but inside, I felt a strange fire kindle in my chest. I was cold, broken, and betrayed, but I was not defeated. My children had tried to erase me, to cast me aside like something disposable. But my story was far from over. I had a secret, and secrets, once revealed, can change everything. Morning came slowly that day, though I barely noticed. The storm had left me half-conscious, drifting between dreams and cold reality. My lips were cracked, my skin numb. I thought perhaps this was death, and part of me was ready for it. But fate had other plans. A voice cut through the silence, urgent, panicked. The door creaked, and I felt a rush of air as someone entered the cabin. "Dear Lord, Mrs. Whitaker, are you alive?" It was Mr. Henderson, my neighbor from down the road. He and his wife Clara had noticed my absence. When I hadn't answered calls, when the snow outside my house lay undisturbed, they grew worried, and so, even in the blizzard, they set out to find me. Their flashlights swept across the dark cabin. I remember the warmth of their hands as they lifted me, wrapped me in blankets, and carried me to their truck. I remember Clara's voice, firm but gentle. "Stay with us, sweetheart. Don't you dare leave us now." They rushed me to the hospital, where the doctors fought to bring warmth back into my frozen veins. And as I lay under their care, drifting between sleep and awareness, I realized I had been saved, not by my own children, but by neighbors who treated me with more love than my own flesh and blood. Word spread quickly in our small town. People whispered in shock, abandoned in a cabin, in the middle of a blizzard, by her own children. The disbelief turned to outrage. Families talked about it in hushed tones at dinner tables. Church pews buzzed with whispers. My story, once private, was now an open wound for the whole community to see. And my children could not hide. They tried, of course. Emily appeared at the hospital days later, her voice sharp with false concern. "Mom, it's all a misunderstanding," she insisted loudly, ensuring nurses could overhear. "We would never abandon you. We thought you'd be safe there until we sorted things out." Michael followed, defensive and impatient. "People are exaggerating, Mom. You know how gossip spreads. We didn't mean for it to look like this." And Sarah, poor Sarah. She stood at the foot of my bed, her eyes red with guilt, unable to meet my gaze. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but her silence spoke louder than any excuse. The community didn't buy their lies. Neighbors who had once greeted my children warmly now turned cold. In the grocery store, people whispered behind their backs. At church, they were met with sidelong glances and stiff nods. Betrayal, once hidden in a dark cabin, had become public knowledge. And then came the lawyers. I had prepared my will years earlier, quietly, meticulously. My fortune, every property, every share, every hidden investment, was laid out in black and white. My children, in their arrogance, had assumed I had nothing, that my modest home and simple life reflected poverty. But the truth was about to shatter that illusion. When my attorney arrived at the hospital, briefcase in hand, I saw the flicker of unease in Emily's eyes, the twitch in Michael's jaw. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to have anything worth protecting. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice calm but deliberate. "Mrs. Whitaker has asked that her children be reminded of the terms of her will. She holds assets totaling $87 million. The words hung in the room like thunder. Emily's face drained of color. Michael nearly choked. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. 87 million. The very woman they had cast aside as a burden was, in truth, wealthier than they could have ever imagined. Emily recovered first, though her composure cracked at the edges. "Mom," she stammered, "you should have told us. We could have helped manage it." Michael's greed shone through immediately. 87 million? Mom, you can't just give that away without talking to us first. We're your children. It belongs to us too. Their words stung worse than the frostbite. Even in the face of their betrayal, their first instinct was not remorse, not shame, not an apology, but entitlement. I turned my face away, too tired to argue, too wounded to scream. But inside, I knew the truth. The will would not change, not after what they had done. That fortune would never fall into the hands of those who had abandoned me. Instead, it would go to those who had shown me kindness without asking for anything in return. My neighbors, charities, hospitals, children without families of their own. The Hendersons, who had saved my life, would receive enough to live comfortably for the rest of their days. The orphanage where I once volunteered would expand, giving hundreds of children the home mine had failed to provide. Hospitals would be funded, scholarships established, and lives transformed. And my children? They would be left with nothing but the memory of that night. The night they walked away from their mother. and from the legacy that could have been theirs. For me, the revelation was bittersweet. The betrayal still burned, but justice was already taking root. And though my body remained weak, my spirit grew stronger with each passing day. Because now the world knew, and so did my children. The day of the will reading was heavy with silence. The air inside the attorney's office felt dense, as though every corner of the room carried judgment. My children sat together, though not united. Emily tapped her polished nails nervously on the armrest. Michael bounced his leg with barely concealed impatience, and Sarah clutched a tissue, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. I sat opposite them in my wheelchair, fragile in body, but unyielding in spirit. The betrayal still echoed in my bones, but this moment, this day, wasn't about bitterness. It was about truth. And truth, I had learned, cuts deeper than any storm. The attorney, Mr. Langford, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick envelope. His voice was calm, deliberate, and carried the weight of finality. By the authority vested in me as executor of Mrs. Whitaker's estate, we are here to confirm her last will and testament. Emily leaned forward eagerly, a smile twitching at the corners of her lips. Michael whispered under his breath, "Finally." Only Sarah sat still, tears glistening as though she already knew what was coming. The lawyer continued, "My estate, valued at approximately $87 million, shall not be distributed to my biological children, Emily Whitaker, Michael Whitaker, and Sarah Whitaker." The room cracked open with silence. The day of the will reading was heavy with silence. The air inside the attorney's office felt dense, as though every corner of the room carried judgment. My children sat together, though not united. Emily tapped her polished nails nervously on the armrest. Michael bounced his leg with barely concealed impatience, and Sarah clutched a tissue, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. I sat opposite them in my wheelchair, fragile in body, but unyielding in spirit. The betrayal still echoed in my bones, but this moment, this day, wasn't about bitterness. It was about truth. And truth, I had learned, cuts deeper than any storm. The attorney, Mr. Langford, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick envelope. His voice was calm, deliberate, and carried the weight of finality. By the authority vested in me as executor of Mrs. Whitaker's estate, we are here to confirm her last will and testament. Emily leaned forward eagerly, a smile twitching at the corners of her lips. Michael whispered under his breath, "Finally." Only Sarah sat still, tears glistening as though she already knew what was coming. The lawyer continued, "My estate, valued at approximately $87 million, shall not be distributed to my biological children, Emily Whitaker, Michael Whitaker, and Sarah Whitaker." The room cracked open with silence. Emily froze, her jaw hanging. Michael bolted upright, his voice a snarl. "What do you mean, not distributed to us? That's absurd." Mr. Langford raised a hand, calm but firm. "Please let me finish." Michael's fists clenched, but he sat down, seething. Mr. Langford read on. "My fortune shall instead be allocated to causes and individuals who have shown kindness, loyalty, and love when I needed it most. To the Henderson family, who saved my life on the night of the blizzard, I leave $10 million and the deed to my lakefront property. To St. Mary's Orphanage, I leave $15 million to expand their facilities and care for children in need. To the regional hospital that tended to me with compassion, I leave $20 million for the creation of a new wing, dedicated to long-term care for the elderly and vulnerable. The remainder shall be placed in a trust to fund scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, so they may have opportunities my own children chose not to value. Each word landed like a hammer. Emily turned pale, her voice shrill. Mother, you can't do this. We're your family. Blood matters. I looked at her, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. Blood may connect us, Emily, but love is what sustains us. When I needed warmth, you gave me the cold. When I needed compassion, you gave me calculation. You turned family into a transaction, and transactions earn nothing when the heart is empty. Michael slammed his hand on the table. You're punishing us because we made a mistake. We thought you didn't have long left. He stopped, realizing too late what he had admitted. Exactly, I whispered, my voice sharp. You thought my life had an expiration date, and you were willing to hasten it for your convenience. Sarah broke then, sobbing openly. Mom, please, I didn't stop them. I should have. I'm sorry. When the echoes of the will reading faded, a strange quiet settled over my life. Not silence of despair, but a stillness of peace. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened. The weight I had carried, the fear, the loneliness, the secret of my fortune, had finally lifted. My children no longer came around after that day. Emily and Michael vanished into their pride and shame, unwilling to face the judgment of our small town. Sarah wrote me letters at first, trembling words filled with regret and pleas for forgiveness. I read them, tears staining the paper, but I never replied. I could not. Some wounds, though not fatal, never truly close, and yet I did not hate them. Hate would have chained me to them forever. Instead, I let go. I prayed that life would teach them the lesson they had refused to learn from me. That love, once thrown away, cannot always be retrieved. The community, however, stood by me in ways I could never have imagined. The Hendersons visited daily, bringing fresh bread, warm smiles, and laughter that filled the quiet spaces of my home. Clara would sit by my bed, knitting while we spoke of small joys, flowers blooming by the lake, the children playing in the park. And Mr. Henderson, every time he looked at me, I could see the quiet pride in his eyes, knowing he had helped save a life. When the donations from my estate began to take form, I watched with humbled wonder. The orphanage built new wings filled with bright colors and laughter. The hospital broke ground on its new care facility, naming it the Whitaker Wing, not for glory, but for gratitude, and scholarships were granted to young people who had nothing but dreams. Dreams that perhaps my children once had, before greed clouded their hearts. Each act of kindness that grew from my fortune felt like a balm on the wounds my family had left behind. It was as if my pain had been transformed into seeds, and those seeds blossomed into gardens of hope for others. And still, on quiet nights, I thought of my children. I thought of Emily's sharp ambition, Michael's restless drive, Sarah's tender heart. I remembered them as children, their small hands reaching for mine, their laughter echoing across our modest backyard. Those memories were both gifts and burdens, reminders of what had been and of what was lost. Perhaps one day, long after I am gone, they will sit in silence and realize what they threw away. Not the money, but the chance to walk beside their mother in love. Perhaps they will come to understand that no fortune in this world can replace the warmth of family once it is gone. As for me, I found my peace not in riches, not in punishment, but in knowing that my story had meaning. I had survived abandonment, betrayal, and the coldest night of my life, and yet I had risen, not through anger, but through the simple truth that love cannot be bought, only given. If there is one lesson I leave behind, it is this: wealth may glitter, but it is love that warms. And when the storms of life come, whether of snow or sorrow, it is not money that saves us, but the hearts willing to stand by our side. I was left in the cold, but I did not remain there. I was betrayed, but I was not broken. And though my children abandoned me, I discovered a greater family in neighbors, in strangers, in every life touched by the legacy I chose to leave. The blizzard could have ended me. Instead, it revealed the truth that even in the harshest winter, there are sparks of kindness waiting to be found. And those sparks, once kindled, can outshine even the darkest storm. So, if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads between love and greed, between compassion and convenience, remember my story. Remember that no inheritance, no fortune, no possession will ever matter more than the warmth you give to another human soul. For in the end, it is not money that people remember. It is not wealth that carries on. It is love, always love, that endures.